Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of Overcast. I mean, this is one of our favorite topics to discuss. I would say specs to discuss, as always. And we have to chat and go knee deep about Unholy Death Knight because it's looking great. It's looking fantastic.
It's so amazing.
It's a long time coming, and I don't think our guests need any new introduction. They've been here for quite some time. Multiple times. It's Mr. Taez from the Acherus Discord and Mr. Bicepspump, the Unholy DK God, who shall teach you whatever you need to know about Unholy Death Knight. I would know. So let's get right into it. Unholy Death Knight in Dragonflight. I think we have excitement on both ends here from both Taez and Biceps. At least from Biceps, I know because I've been watching his YouTube channel, and you should be watching it too. Talks about the state of Unholy DK in Dragonflight over there. So I know, Biceps has, the YouTube video where he lays out his thoughts. Maybe we can get into some more info on that. I know Taez is talking a lot on the Acherus Discord over there. There's pinned builds and all of that, answering questions. But to have it for the full format of the show, let's just kick it off with a couple of last impressions. Starting off with Taez. Unholy Death Knight, Dragonflight. What are we looking at?
It's amazing, to say the least. They took a lot of our feedback and they rolled with it. They didn't try to make it any more complex than it needed to be. We said that, hey, this feels wrong. This is probably what you should do. And they just did it. It was seamless. It works incredibly well. And I'm so very happy with how the spec looks now.
Perfect. I mean, I feel the same way. But what about Biceps? And I know his thoughts, but people...
I can't be happier. If you remember what it looked like in the first iteration, and then you compare it to what it looks like now, it's night and day.
Yeah.
I feel like the AoE feels satisfying. We get similar gameplay to what we had in BFA, which was very fun. And the single target, it feels... it flows very nicely. I think they specifically made us have a lot more resources, so we don't ever end up in those scenarios when you don't have anything for press. It's much more about a priority game now, more so than a resource management game. And I think I'm a big fan of that because it means that the rotation is just more fun to play.
Yes, I have noticed that because I have recently picked up my Unholy Death Knight on live. And as a student that I am, going through everything Acherus has to offer and all the videos from Biceps, I could not help but see that, man, there's a management resourcing going on over there, man. It's holy shit. And yes, as a very, very new and fresh player of Unholy Death Knight, I was always in a position where I either didn't have enough or I didn't have nothing to press. And it's a symptom of being new. It's a thing to get accustomed to or whatever. But hearing this, that, okay, this is maybe not the case anymore, and you're just going to be maybe a little bit overflown with resources to be able to have a much smoother gameplay. I'm hearing that. I'm not sure. So I made the decision, okay? I blindfolded. I went onto the beta. I made a 70 Unholy Death Knight, picked a build from Taez, because he had some pinned on Acherus, and I just went to the target dummies, and I fell in love, man.
Yeah,
it was just what the fuck, man? This is unbelievable.
It's a good feeling. It's really cool to see, and this is why I am still hopeful for Dragonflight as an expansion. And when a lot of people are, doom and gloom and they haven't played it, and if anybody's watching this and you're still not convinced if you should play Dragonflight or not, Unholy DK is a good example of that because it started from one of the worst designed specs. When it received its sounds, it was so weird, it felt so bad, and now I dare say it's one of the best. The first time I saw it, I was super giddy because of the thematic that Unholy brings, since Unholy is from its concept, from its thematic, is a very controversial spec because a lot of people have been asking for specs like Necromancer, and Necromancer is probably never going to come into the game because of Unholy, because you have this summon the army of the dead not to mention you actually have the skill called Army of the Dead, from the grave and make them do your bidding. And the thing is, a lot of people have missed this, have missed the concept of, using all the pets, using the gargoyle. How many discussions have we had with the gargoyle in Shadowlands? And not to mention how many you guys probably had over the course of the last couple of expansions. That is it. How many discussions have we had about bringing in the plagues, the zits, the pustules, and do all the bursting swords and all of that. And they listened. And now it's in, and now it works, and it's so amazing. Not to mention that we are actually, as Unholy DKs, are getting every good thing from Shadowlands here, right? Am I not mistaken? I love Monstrosity, I love Slappy Hands. Maybe we can go into Soul Reaper as well, which is not something Shadowlands related, but it is one of the capstones, and talk about that for a little bit. And also, yeah, like Marcelian said, in the state that it is, bar some tuning, because obviously numbers are gonna be going. How complete do you guys think the spec is? Is it are we good like this for, like, I don't know, 2 years, or do you still feel like they're missing the mark? Maybe in the general talent tree, right? Because we can all agree that the unholy talents are like.
Yeah, and to that question, adding also the tier set bonus. Okay, just to have it in mind as well.
Oh yeah, because we had those released last week.
So is it complete, guys?
I think I have 2 specific points there. You have to say something. So one of them is that I feel like Soul Reaper is a bit weak. Or like it doesn't feel very impactful to press, especially in the general tree. For instance, Frost DKs, it's not even a DPS upgrade to press it, because it's a 1-cost ability. It heavily kind of impacts your rotation. You get much less free buttons to do other things, right? I think it would be helpful if they increased cost and cooldown and damage of the ability. So instead of coming every 6 seconds, it comes in every 12 seconds something. It maybe costs 2 runes, deal 3 times as much damage, right? It feels much more impactful to press, and it doesn't kind of hinder your normal rotation away. I think that's one thing. Another one is that we sorely lack rage utility as a DK, especially now we chat in Dragonflight. Like, lots more classes have received some form of raid buff or raid utility, that kind of thing. And I feel like DK is one of the classes who's like in the bottom when it comes to how much they bring. Obviously, we have a couple of fights go with mandatory due to crypt, but other than that, there's really not that much we bring. That's something I'd also like to see in the general tree.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree. The Unholy tree, when it comes to its completeness, I don't think there's much more that they could add into the Unholy tree to make it feel like it's done. You know what I mean? There's a couple nodes that are a little bit weird, like Harbinger of Doom, stuff like Pestilence, that are just not quite there tuning-wise, but if they tune them well, it'll be perfectly fine. Design-wise, I mean, I don't know if there's anything else that they could add that would make it better other than, like, Necrotic Plague, but we all know that's not coming back, sadly. The class tree, though, the class tree, though, the Unholy side of this class tree is still just really lackluster, in my honest opinion. You got stuff like, Sacrificial Pact, Control Undead, which isn't even good for Unholy, Brittle, Cleaving Strikes, stuff that you don't really generally want to take in a lot of situations, but you're kind of forced to go through to get to stuff like 2% strength, which is, like, cool, I guess. I don't know. I like it design-wise. I just think the general tree is probably the most lacking out of all of the trees Unholy has access to. To kind of follow up, since Marcelian mentioned it, the tier set, absolutely incredible, man. Really, really cool tier set. Interacting with wounds, which is awesome, gives you some more single target play, and doing something that actually feels impactful and increasing your haste and damage for a period of time. It just feels really good when you have that up. You're going to play, you're going to notice that proc. Yeah. It's going to be something that you feel happening, unlike current tier, which is really nice.
It's perfect. I was going to get to the raid utility part, because this is like one of the curses of I would say, melees in general. If you're not like a rogue or a warrior or something like that, we're always going to have this discussion about the utility. And I wasn't really up to date with anti-magic zone. Was that nerfed even more? Because that used to be a pretty good defensive like, well, why would you bring a DK? Is it not a good argument to bring it to a raid because of that also?
You just bring blood because it scales off max HP.
Well, there you go. There's the answer.
Yeah, and so I think what was it with Max's interview? Ian said that they don't want specs to have that kind of utility. I think from the devs' perspective so far, as much as we know and we were let know, DK is probably the exact amount of utility or value that they want classes to bring to the DK. Then they say something like they want classes or specs to be good on 1 fight or 2, and then just not be required for any other fight, which is maybe better for like an average player, for average guild, but obviously for the top end, we're like, well, that means we're only bringing you for 1 boss and then you're sitting or you're coming on your ult, which...
Well, yeah.
Is this world ever going to be satisfied both ways? Because I kind of find it like they're butting heads every now and again.
I don't know, man. It's rough being a DK right now because we look at these trees. They're so good. We play the spec, it feels so good. And then we look at our raid utility and we're like, man, I really want to play this, but I'm not going to get the chance to because I'm only going to be on in like 2 bosses in this raid tier. Just like, man.
I mean,
if we're unlucky and we don't get tuned very highly, there's definitely a risk that you won't make the cut. You know what I mean?
No. I mean, in terms of like the mechanics that Unholy gets in Dragonflight right now, I think they're kind of covering all bases. As opposed to like, I don't know, Shadowlands, where it maybe lack, cleave damage or something like that. Now you can have the cleave damage. You have like, and I know Biceps talked about this in his video, where it does feel like the old BFA DK, where you just like, you can have like massive AoE and set up, wounds and everything will pop up. It's pretty cool, actually. Not gonna lie. And I was also thinking about, the single target damage and the burst that's also there. So in terms of like a DPS, I think Unholy DK is like checking all the marks. When it comes to like utility, sure, but I cannot help but DK still have the grips. I know it's not ideal, and I know it's not necessarily a good etiquette to have. Okay, you're brought in because you can bullshit to you, but on the other hand, I'm gonna compare it to my former main, Red Paladin, which doesn't have anything, not even spell warding anymore. It's nothing. It's you don't have any reason. Okay. So I think at least for that, there's still a couple of things that at least Unholy can be brought up for.
Well, to kind of counter that point, with basically all the raid utility Unholy can bring, for what reason would you want that over a Blood DK? Blood DK has a shorter grip cooldown. They can grab 2 charges of grip without any issues because, they're not focused on DPS. They have the bigger AMZ. They're just much better at being able to grab all of the utility like Blinding Sleet, being able to grab Asphyxiate, double grip, lower cooldown. Like, they can do everything that Unholy can, but better.
True. I would just say, hey, 2 AMZs is better than 1. More grips is better than 1.
You can never have enough AMZs.
I'd call it 1.5 AMZs because Blood's just going to be like twice as big.
True.
Yeah. It's not useless, but it's just that it's something you can do without. It's nice to have a DK, but it's not something you need. Like, you need Demon Hunter and a Warrior and a Warlock and a Mage, and the list goes on. But when you go to DK, it's like, this could be nice, but
I'm curious if they ever went into this direction, because if they do that, obviously the mentality goes into the direction of, okay, then all classes or all specs have to have something. Let's say all classes in this case. But if we're gonna argue Unholy over Blood and stuff like that, then that means we would have to have like 40-man raids or something like that, where all specs can have a place, right? Or then they would have, I can imagine that they would put, I don't know, something like either attack power on Blood DK or versatility. Druids now have versatility with Mark of the Wild or stuff like that. Then you're gonna compete, and I feel like this discussion is never going to end. In the context of how the game is designed right now, it's never going to cater to all of the specs, and all the specs are going to be as good. So, I would imagine like the race world first and high, 1% players, where everybody's just going to play the one thing that just
top 100 guys.
Yeah. So if outside of that, it's really good. I mean, the good example, maybe it's my main that we had for Sepulchre, which I dare say Prot Warrior was one of the worst seen tanks for Sepulchre when it came out, and if I'm not mistaken, it became one of the best tanks for Jailer by the end. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see this mentality change, or maybe this attitude changed all throughout the first season, going into how they've decided to maintain constant patches and hotfixes and buffs or nerfs depending on the situation that's required. And I don't know if we talked about this last time, but I did have something that's a little bit more personal, but I do feel like a lot of people might resonate with this when it comes to picking a main or picking an alt. One thing that a lot of people kind of look for, and I think I'm not the only one doing this, is variety of builds, and maybe we can go into this as well with the current iteration of stuff, because I feel like Unholy, although it's not the only spec, it's one of the best specs to showcase different thematics and types of builds where they can go well, and ideally with the mentality of like keeping everything up to date, buffing, nerfing stuff. Hopefully we can see variety in the towns, because I have spoken in the last couple of days with a bunch of theory crafters for different types of specs, because I'm looking for a main as well, because I want this variety. I want to see, okay, if I'm going a raid, I'm playing a pet-centric build. If I'm going a dungeon, I'm playing a wound or a disease-centric build, and so on and so forth. Unholy seems to have this. Other specs do not, and that's kind of a shame for other specs, but today we're looking at Unholy. So we can talk about raid first, let's say. What do you guys see Unholy be able to do in the raid? Since we've also had, 5 bosses that we could test so far, how do you guys see Unholy perform in these fights? What type of builds do they have? Strengths, weaknesses, stuff like that? What do you guys see so far with what we've seen, over half of the raid already?
There's, it's obviously going to be a pure single target option with Gargoyle. And I think they're going to tune it in such a way that that's going to be like the best. If you want just pure single target, you pick up Gargoyle. I'm not sure if we have a funneling gameplay thing going with Festamite. Right, you spread wounds on lots of targets, you burst them all, you gain loads of strength, and that gives you lots of burst. That might be the play in certain circumstances. I'm not sure. I think Unholy generally doesn't have that much like pure single target build variety.
Yeah, it kind of depends on tuning. Right now, there are 2 single target builds that are kind of competing with each other as long as Gargoyle's mastery scaling is fixed. One of them focuses on like the left side of the tree where you're grabbing like Festermite, Unholy Assault, all of that over there. And then the Gargoyle setup will move over to the right side where you're grabbing, so obviously Gargoyle, you're going to grab Unholy Aura and Commander of the Dead. So with those 2 build options, they do actually play quite a bit differently, even though it's only like 3 talent points different. Since Gargoyle, you're going to be, building up this massive single target window every 3 minutes, while the Unholy Assault setup mostly focuses on those Festermite windows and the 90-second windows instead. Then, as Biceps pointed out, you have your funnel potential in Festermite with like Vile Contagion, spreading wounds when there's a lot of ads. Like, there is a lot of build variety here. I could even see like a disease-centric setup for Spread Cleave, even though that's kind of like one of Unholy's weakest spots. With Plaguebringer, Super Strain, and Ebon Fever, you can actually crank a lot of damage on spread enemies if you want to.
Yeah. I think it's a very good change, the fact that they made it so that Plaguebringer, the ability that makes a dot tick twice as fast, it's not a debuff on the enemy, it's a buff on you. So what you can do is you can dot up everything, and then you hit just Ghost Strike on your main target, and everything will start taking more damage.
Yeah, it's really good.
But, obviously, to go into the big AoE cleave, you need Vile Contagion, and you need to go quite heavily into the left side of the tree. So it's going to be a big question about, is that worth it? You have to sacrifice quite a lot of single target nodes in order to actually make it through down to something that looks very close to our Mythic Plus build. Because that's what you're going to kind of need to go to in order to leverage that big funnel.
Yeah. I think the sacrifices there would probably be like All Will Serve and maybe Reaping.
Yeah. Mages as well. Those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. So the boss would hatch up with Shadow the Dragon Eggs. That's a potential contender. But that also highlights one of Unholy's weaknesses, which is our build-up. Like, Unholy hates it when you get a couple ads and they die in 5 seconds, like there is literally very few things we can actually do to do damage in that scenario. And, you know, obviously there's going to be tuning or whatever, but when I did the boss, I felt like, you know, I won't be able to hit these mobs for any significant kind of damage at all with Unholy Toolkit. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be
fair,
another
it was
boss where-
heroic.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think we were scaled pretty highly on the eye level 2 for heroic, no?
yeah, everything hurt a lot today, so I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, then you had like Boomkins doing like, you know, 150k damage. So like, I don't know, everything's all over the place.
There are quite a lot of nodes that I feel like these are potential, you know, small swaps where you can kind of direct your damage more into specific scenarios, and I like that. So I think obviously we have one, we put on the Gargoyle build, we can still go like, you know, I might sacrifice this 1 point in Reaping to pick up Unholy Blight, or, you know, there's a lot of like small changes you can make, which aren't obvious which one's best. And I'm a big fan of that because I think that brings build variety for specific scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really nice going through all the theory crafting stuff for Unholy and being like, all right, this node's 2.6% DPS, this node's 2.7% DPS, but the 2.6% DPS node is going to be, you know, say better in one specific scenario than the, you know, 2.7% DPS node. It's really interesting, the dynamics it creates. Obviously, tuning's far from done, but the way things are tuned right now feels really good for all the build variety you can do. There's almost no nodes in the tree you're never going to want to take, except for like Harbinger of Doom, Rotten Touch, Pestilence, maybe Pestilent Pustules. Like, they're all really good.
I did want to touch on like two things. Normally, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about the middle side of the talent tree, because whatever build you're going to get, you're probably going to go deeply into the middle side, since that's where the major cooldowns are. And you first of all mentioned Super Strain, which was the legendary, still is the legendary that we have right now in Shadowlands with all the plagues. And it reminds me with that and what was it, Ebon Fever? It reminds me of Affliction Warlock. How first of all, so my first question is, and then we can go into the other one. How important is the middle side of the talent tree, and how far will you always want to go into it? Because I think last time we talked about morbidity, if I'm not mistaken, and that was nerfed. I don't know. I think a couple of days after our podcast, because it felt very overtuned. It felt like you're always going to take that. How do you guys feel about the middle side now? Probably lower down the capstone, because I'm thinking Magus of the Dead and stuff like that is always going to be very accessible. But if you invest further down, it's going to take away from maybe wanting to spread both into diseases and the pets, and then I can go into the other side of the question.
I think we always go Super Strain. Like, it's the one common point for all builds I've thought about. It's always Super Strain. It's just very powerful. So I think it highlights that center part of the tree is something you always kind of go into. Same thing with Army of the Dead. Something I wouldn't, even for Mythic Plus, where you want to do as much AoE as possible, you want that single target burst. That means that a talent like Army of the Dead is just incredibly valuable.
Yeah, same thought process for me. Like, every build I've thought of, like Super Strain is the one capstone that's always there. Army of the Dead, you always take. Army of the Damned is probably an always take as well, because, I mean, like Bicep said, even in Mythic Plus, where you're mostly focused on AoE, being able to have that army every single boss or on those big ads is just incredibly valuable. Stuff like Apocalypse is incredible. All those Death Coil nodes flanking the middle side of the tree are incredibly powerful. All of them work together to be kind of the cornerstone of all of Unholy. That center section, that is Unholy, and then everything to the sides is kind of what you augment it with.
Funny enough, you actually touched on my second question, but I did want to, like, kind of side notes mention Super Strain. Do we really want it because of the Frost Fever, since it generates runic power? Is that like the main thing, or is it just the damage is really good?
Have you looked at your details lately? It's a lot of damage.
It's a lot of damage.
Yeah, if you add up all the diseases, I looked at it, was like 13-14% of my damage overall. It's just that currently Blood Plague and Frost Fever are tuned very highly. But Frost Fever is also one of the main reasons we now have a lot more resources than usual. Like, if you compare Shadowlands to currently, like, what have we got an extra? One of them is Frost Fever, Runic Power. and the other one is runic attenuation, giving more runic power.
Yeah, those two together basically put Unholy in this really, really nice spot resource-wise, where it's got just enough resources to where you always have a button to spend, but not so much where it suffers like the Frost issue, where you just feel too flooded on resources and you're ignoring some of them. You're still always trying to balance like runic power runes. You're going to prioritize runic power over runes, but at the same time, you're not like blatantly wasting just a ton of resources.
I was
really good spot, honestly.
I was gonna mention that since right now in Shadowlands, it's a kind of a different spec, but it's the first time that I've played Unholy where I felt like maybe I just want to ignore some of the resources. Unless in AoE, since it seemed like I couldn't maintain all of the resources without capping some wounds bursting or runic power consuming or anything like that. So the second part of the question, which you've kind of answered, was around the Death Coil talent, since it seems like we have a lot more, and I'm a big fan of this. I think it's really cool to make Death Coil a really impactful, not just like a cooldown reduction, or like an enabler, but it does seem like it's a lot of damage. And I would imagine that if you pick stuff like, I don't know, Sudden Doom, Run Touch, Call of Devastation, Arbiter of Doom, you're probably going to take Death Rot on the left-hand side, right? Since it seems like it's going to work really well. So do you guys think that these Death Coil nodes are going to be in all of the builds? Because you mentioned that you're probably going to always take them, similar to Super Strain.
I'd say almost all of the builds. You'd probably sacrifice one or two of them if you're going like heavy AoE for Epidemic. But I still don't see a world where you wouldn't want a lot of those nodes for, the lower target counts. Like Death Coil just does an absolute ton of damage. And you look at like improved Death Coil, which makes it cleave. And then right below it, you have Coil of Devastation, which makes it leave a dot on the target for 35% extra damage. And those two alone make it worth more than Epidemic up to like 5 targets. So there's points in times, probably specific dungeons in Dragonflight, where you just won't ever even want Epidemic, which is like it's a little bit weird. Yeah.
I did play it, so I played it quite a lot on the beta, and I feel like when you're running Bursting Swords, right, your runes are so valuable. Sometimes you end up being in a situation where, like, I don't have time to press my runic power, spending abilities, and that's where you're like, how useful would Epidemic be here? Flame, when we played that dungeon, right? My Epidemic damage was like 5% of my overall.
I remember them, right? The meters.
Yeah. That's also because it was a bit special where we kill everything extremely quickly.
Yeah.
But still, I feel like the Death Coil nodes are great for single target, and they make Death Coil very worthwhile to press in AoE. And it's kind of like, you're getting two good things, where it's not like a scenario where you go, I spec it, but I lose power elsewhere. It's I spec it and I gain power everywhere. So I don't think we'll ever, not pick it.
I see. Because you mentioned that runes are important, so I would imagine that consuming runic power to generate more runes wouldn't that be like obvious? Or?
Yeah, of course, yeah. And it depends on the situation. We have Empowered Rune Weapon now as well. I mean, we're getting more resources. That was the third one. I knew I missed something. Anyway, obviously you're going to press your runic power spending abilities to get more runes, but depending how you play, that's not always required.
With all the resource generation we have available to us now, especially in like AoE, we have Empowered Rune Weapon, we have Infected Claws all the time, we have Abomination's Limb, we just have absolute ton of rune generation that we have access to the point where we almost don't need to spend runic power in AoE to generate runes, because we have enough to make it through the entire pool anyway.
Agree, yeah. But we'll see though. Obviously, we only play heroics. I'm quite excited to look at some a bit longer pools where there's more setup going on. In those scenarios, we will definitely be spending runic power, and that will increase the value of Epidemic because it's going to find more space in the rotation. Yeah. Like I'm talking about cases where, you're going to Festering Strike 2 targets, you're going to dump some runic power, go into Death and Decay window. Currently, when you play, kind of like, pop down your Death and Decay immediately with all other cooldowns and they pack dice in 5 seconds. It's very different.
I assume you're also talking about a world where Boomkin doesn't do triple the damage of everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, tuning aside.
I mean, that I would imagine that impacts the speed of how things die in the raid. You did mention you've went into a lot of the dungeons on the beta, and it would be ideal to have Mythic Plus under our belt before we talk about something like this. But how do you feel about Unholy in AoE and bar scaling and everything else that you do? How is it? Obviously, it seems like we're getting the BFA playstyle back. In terms of like the same question to that I asked about the raid, in terms of build variety, options, tools that you have, you mentioned that we might not be able to pick Epidemic. Do you even think that might be good? Maybe Epidemic needs a buff to make it a competitive talent, since it sounds like it's something that you want in AoE. It sounds like the answer that we've been asking for, you know, when AoE Runic Spender. So it's a little bit weird that it seems like it's dropping in value and priority. So overall, what do you guys think about all of this in Mythic Plus?
I think if you asked me like a couple of weeks ago, I would have said, you know, we're not going to pick Epidemic ever. But then they went in and they actually added in lots of the functionality that Death Coil had and Epidemic didn't have, and made that a part of Epidemic, like extending Dark Transformation that used to be a Death Coil only thing, or applying Death Rot that used to be Death Coil only. It's now your main target for Epidemic, which is a bit weird, but still. I feel like they made it such a way that Epidemic is probably going to be a play, but it's going to be situational depending on dungeon. Like it's going to be the big pool kind of, we're going to do 20 targets here dungeon.
Yeah, I do think that they could make Epidemic more valuable in the situations where they want it to be valuable, because they blatantly said they want it to be better at 4+ targets, right? So I think if they wanted to do that, it doesn't require much of a change, not like a buff specifically, just fixing up Death Rot to where it works in a more intuitive way, because like Bicep said, right now you press Epidemic and Death Rot only applies to the enemy you have targeted, which it's really weird. If it applied to everything, good. Yeah. If Epidemic applied to all targets hit, or Death Rot applied to all targets hit by Epidemic, it would actually lead into this like really, really rewarding playstyle too, where you'd set up your wounds, you'd dump your runic power on Epidemic before you go into D&D, like we used to do. And you're rewarded heavily for it by, you know, that 10% shadow damage increase, which is now affecting all of your bursting swords damage, half of your scourge strike damage. Like everything you're doing in that D&D window is getting boosted by that. And it'd be super, super rewarding if they just added that little change, and Epidemic would actually have a really good place.
For sure.
Do you think this might be a bug or like unintended? Maybe. Because from the tooltip itself, I mean, you would think if you're like a new Unholy DK and you read the Death Rot tooltip, says Death Coil and Epidemic debilitate your enemy, blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. So you think, Epidemic does AoE, so do you think that might be an oversight?
I said it's very likely a bug. The reason I say that is because it always applies to your target. Doesn't matter if that target has virulent plague. Doesn't matter if that target got hit by an epidemic. Doesn't even matter if that target was within 100 yards of you. You have that targeted, it gets applied to it.
All right. Okay.
So well, I'm pretty sure it's a bug.
Probably gonna be fixed.
I guess that's good
overall,
news.
Like with build variety, I don't think we're ever gonna have a situation where we don't pick up the bursting source build. I feel like that's gonna be our new default. Obviously, currently we can kind of go, we're going to do bursting swords and be big AoE, or we do more like single target oriented. And I don't think in Dragonflight we're ever going to pick up like a Gargoyle build with Mythic Plus, because you give up far too much AoE potential.
Yeah, unless there's this weird like funnel situation where you really, really need a lot of big single target damage in a small window, and Army of the Dead just isn't quite enough. I could see it in funnel situations, but I don't know. I don't see it really having much of a place otherwise.
I think Dragonflight is going to be a bursting sword, quadratic scaling kind of meta. Quite excited about it.
It's really good. It's really good, man.
It feels incredible to play. Like when you pick up, so Vile Contagion, man, I love this ability. It's so great. So generally, right, if you're going to generate wounds in any big AoE pool, what you do is press Dark Transformation, and then you get random 30% chance on every kind of claw attack the pet does. And you know, if there's 10 targets, that's an average of 3 wounds every time he attacks. So you get a couple every time, right? Vile Contagion, right? You generate 6 wounds on one target, and then you can get 48 by pressing that ability. Like, it's such an insane amount of wounds. It's just crazy.
It's so fun though. You go into a dungeon, you pull big, you build up some wounds, you press that button, you drop D&D, and you're just soaring, man. High on life. It's so good.
This is I want to test this. This is the exact same talent that all of the dot specs in the game want. This type of mechanic, especially Affliction. Since Affliction had the whatever, copy your dots from one target to another. This is basically Vile Contagion, which I was always really curious how exactly it works. Because it sounds like if it works like the tooltip indicates, and it is working like the way the tooltip indicates, this is going to be crazy. Where you 2 Scorch Strikes, instant max stacks of Fester Might? That seems explosively... Who knows, maybe we can get back to 800k DPS Unholy DK and Mythic Plus BFA Shenanigans Bonanza. That was so amazing to play.
You get this lovely chain reaction as well, right? Because you have a couple low health targets in a pool. So you put up wounds to everything, right? Everything 6 stacks. Some low health mob's going to die earlier, and that's going to trigger and explode all those wounds, which is going to trigger another mob to die. So you get this kind of like avalanche effect where suddenly the pool just explodes. And everything's dead.
It's so good, man. I love it so much.
At this point, it definitely looks, I would say, a lot more appealing to get on Unholy DK and Mythic Plus as opposed to the raid due to the utility and whatnot. This is one of the things I noticed again as a very new and fresh student of the spec. It's like when I tried this on target dummies, because I didn't have the balls to get into a dungeon just yet before learning, but when I saw like everything be applied instantly, and coming back, from just learning how the AoE works from Unholy DK in Shadowlands, right? It's like I have to do the sequence and all of that, and watch out for the D&D window. And in Shadowlands, just press that, Vile Contagious, everything, and then just spam the strikes and stuff. It's amazing to play, and I can potentially see it as like one of the go-to melees when you have, and this is a very important topic because we have to take note on the roster of dungeons we're gonna have for Dragonflight. And I don't know, there's Halls of Valor, there's Court of Stars, right? There's Ruby as well from Dragonflight, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just trying to think, where do we have the dungeons with high density of mobs, and where do we have like the dungeons where we have lower? Because Biceps mentioned a very good point in terms of like the epidemic playstyle as well, where there are probably going to be dungeons where you're going to have a lot more value on Death Coil spamming, because it's going to be if you're not going to have that +5 target situation, then this is like the most important thing. I feel it's like, how is the roster of dungeons presented right now, and where would Unholy DK shine the most? And I think still, even though Cleave is better, I think still those high density mobs is going to be like the jam for Unholy DKs, as it used to be in BFA.
Sure, yeah.
What was it? And back then, I didn't play DK, but I would watch MDI and I would watch streams and stuff, and it was just a fun spectacle to be observing. That's it. Because when you saw like an Unholy DK just throw everything out there, it was just amazing. Yeah. So I think it's very, very positive in terms of like what we'll be expecting from Unholy DKs and Mythic Plus for sure, as opposed to like that first discussion regarding the raid, the utility and all of that. But just going outside this whole top 100, race to world first or whatever, I think due to its kit. And again, I feel that Unholy kind of has an answer to almost everything as a melee. I don't see too many gaps inside of this. I think you mentioned that Soul Reaper is not that strong at the moment. Maybe that could be a situation.
You don't play that in M+ though?
No, I'm talking about the raid here now. Like okay. Yeah. I don't know, because you obviously for execute phases you're gonna have like the warriors and all of that. Maybe that's something they could look at, but at this point I feel, I don't know, seeing other specs being in a bad state and seeing Unholy like now, I'm afraid to like even mention stuff like, maybe we could have this for Unholy be better. I'm afraid to ask about that shit, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Unholy's also incredibly tanky.
Oh yeah, man.
Which is going to be very useful in raid.
Dude.
I in the raid testing, I struggled to die, man. We were trying to wipe it. I'm like, I can't die, guys. I can't. A little bit of Acropolis popped, and I'm just sitting here like, all right, I'm standing at bad. Give me 10 minutes.
This is true. This is, again, for me, shocking coming from a long time playing as a red paladin, expecting to be tanky because you're wearing a plate and blah, blah. Dude, I played a DK last night on my 240 eye level, and except from like one-shots and stuff, I didn't. There's so many tools you can have to survive as a DK. It's so good. And if Shadowlands is even better, man, sign me up.
Dragonflight.
But that's what I said.
Yeah.
You're not hearing me correctly.
It's Dragonflight's so good.
I said it a lot of time, man. DK is the I don't give a fuck class, man. It's like if you're gonna make this is what I.
But it makes sense. See, I don't feel it's overpowered. I feel this is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned. That if they're gonna make a big I don't know, let's say plate. It doesn't really matter what armor you use, but let's say a big plate wearing class, and you make it slow, make it impactful. This is like, I think that obviously we can showcase the benefits of Unholy, and hopefully other classes and specs can be addressed in a similar way. But Unholy and DK by extension is the immovable, unstoppable, inexorable assault, right? It's just coming and you cannot stop it. And if you want to run away, you get over here and all that stuff. So that's really cool, and I love that they kept that up. And I think we can criticize the devs and we can criticize Blizzard for everything that they're doing wrong, but I think it's only fair to address the things that they are doing right. And I feel like what they're doing right now with Unholy and putting actually taking the time to like, oh, you guys like this? There you go. Oh, you like this other stuff? Well, have this too as well. Like, why couldn't we just have this all the time? And look how happy and excited people are, and people switching to Unholy, and they want to play more and they want to pay the subscription. So obviously this is working. So hopefully we can keep piling up on top of this, because in the last couple of years it felt like they gave us with one hand and they took with the other, and it was a little bit weird. It's like, why when we can just enjoy the game and it's looking so fun.
Yeah, I was like sitting yesterday just looking at all of the tools Unholy has, right? So okay, problems incoming. There's anti-magic shell, dead striking, what's it called? Anti-magic zone, the one that gets you into Lichborn with the was it a conduit that gives you damage reduction, I believe.
Hardened bones, yeah.
That as well. The Icebound Fortitude, and then I log into my Pally and I see Shield of Vengeance. That's it. It's like, dude, come on. This is so good. And I'm not saying again, Unholy is broken because of that. No, this is how a spec like this is supposed to be, right? This is the fantasy of it. So kudos, man. I would say it's a success story. And I remember like lots of our talks from the past on the podcast regarding Unholy, especially in 9.2 and then maybe a little bit in season 4. Unholy didn't have like all of the kudos that it should have. There was problems over there. And I was going to ask you guys, because maybe I don't know how much Biceps looked at and tested Frost, but I'm going to have to ask this question. Just as a comparison, maybe short and sweet. Taez probably knows maybe a little bit better, but expect an answer from both of you guys. When you compare the two specs, the two DPS specs, Unholy and Frost, as you know, with all the biased answer you can have, whatever, how would you rank them? Do you see them both on the same level? Do you see them maybe one excelling a bit better in one part of the game and the other in another? How do you see the specs right now? And I'm asking this more as a brand new student of the Death Knight.
You did more raid testing than me, Biceps. Or as Frost anyway. I only did Unholy Blood, but you're probably better at this than me. So feel free to go ahead first.
Right. So I'm going to say with Frost, it plays very similarly to Shadowlands. It has a little bit more resources generally, but overall, if you played Frost in Shadowlands and you play Frost in Dragonflight, at least for raid, it's gonna feel the same. We do the same kind of things. We have the same cooldown windows. There's been a slight shift in how our damage profile looks like. Like if you play Obliteration, you're gonna have 50% of your damage coming from Obliterate, that kind of thing. But overall, kind of same. But I think that's fine because I think Frost plays well generally. It's kind of like a satisfying and rewarding spec to play. I feel like with Unholy Day, there's been a big improvement when it comes to like the feel of the spec.
Man, it reminds me.
You cannot ask me that kind of question. I'm an Unholy main, so I will always say Unholy feels better.
That's why I asked it. Because I know, I'm always was leaning towards Unholy anyways, but I wanted to get the perspective of someone who has mained Unholy, but also dabbled into Frost as well. I mean, Unholy always looked more appealing to me.
I guess
Frost is always a bit undertuned on the beta. It doesn't make it better. So when you play it, you're like, it feels I'm putting up big hits, but then you're like, not doing that much damage overall because some of the talents on the tune, that kind of thing. I feel like after tuning pass for Frost, where you get a bit more impact for the points, it's going to feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you're competing with a prot warrior for damage, something's wrong there. But I think feel-wise, Frost is in a pretty good state. I've done a lot of playtesting, dungeons and target dummies, stuff like that for Frost on the beta. I didn't do any raid testing, as I already mentioned, but I don't know. Frost has a really nice flow to it, which, like Bicep said, it's pretty much the same as Shadowlands, except a couple little shifts here and there, like, you'll have Polar Frost more often, stuff like that. It generally feels the same, though, and it's not a bad thing. It's basically like Frost Plus. You have the same kit as before, you just do everything a little bit better. And you had mentioned, like, situations where, one spec will do better than the other. I still do feel like Frost is going to have the edge at, like, mid to low target counts, talking like 2 to 5 targets. It's got a great
2-target cleave is just...
Yeah.
Frost was made for 2-target cleave.
Yeah. It's all right, so when you look at the target, man.
Yeah.
It's funny to see how at the beginning of the alpha, Frost was like, "Oh, this is such a good talent tree. Look at this. This is how you make a spec." And then they made a whole. It's like, wait a minute, we can get better.
It still is.
We still have all of that, though. Like we have the shield spec in the AoE. We have Glacial Advance now being like something you can actually use. We have Frostwell's Indignation, right? The issue I have is that they feel a bit undertuned, so they're not very. It doesn't feel exciting to press them.
Yeah, but we'll have a full-on episode about Frost DK exclusively, and we're gonna have Muffin in as well, and we're gonna talk a lot more. I was just curious on how the boys would compare the two specs, because I was kind of expecting an answer where like, okay, Frost will still dominate in cleave, 2-3 targets is gonna be insane still. Tuning aside, but it's hard not to linger that because. When you play an Unholy on the beta right now in heroic dungeons, things just melt around. It's a beautiful thing, and I think people don't put enough emphasis on how important tuning is at the stage of the game, because when tuning is done properly, that also translates into how rewarding certain talents and abilities feel when you press them. And right now, Taez put it, like when you do compete with prot warriors on damage, not that rewarding, right? But when you like have the vile contagion, spread all of that and start cleaving and dealing massive AoE damage, that feels rewarding, and you see that on the numbers. So this is why it's very important, to put the emphasis. Dude, wait for tuning, because maybe things will change after everything is a little bit more ironed out.
Yeah, bar some exceptions. They've been doing decently at keeping the beta up to date and adding new stuff.
I feel like there's been so many changes this beta. I've been like, this is an amazing change. This is an amazing change. This is great. This is great. Like it's just been coming one after another.
Yeah.
Like you're a kid in a candy store, man. It's so good.
Which the reaction, the awe for a lot of us is warranted, because we haven't had this type of situation for at least 2 expansions, let's be real, more or less. So having this is like almost unbelievable, right? It's
the thing, it's so weird. It's like, this doesn't really happen. Like, what is this, Christmas?
Yeah, it's good, man. It's good.
Defenicate 8 targets, gargle off the GCD, gargle giving runic power,
No, why? Why are you taking my toys away?
And I do believe a lot of these points we kind of made in our past talks, a lot of them. It's like, I remember the talks when we were like, we always had questions in regards to like, okay, what would you guys do to fix the class? What would you guys change? What would you implement if you would be able to bring back some? Remember those?
Yeah.
I think a lot of those kind of made it. And I honestly remember the target
really
cap
cool.
for Death and Decay. I remember talking about this. I remember about the GCD on Gargoyle. There was a lot that we talked about in the past. And this is very cool to see happening, man. It's very reassuring.
It's a nice world. And maybe one thing that we can kind of end it with, well, mostly in theory crafting, because we didn't have time to test them out yet. But a lot of people are talking about the Season 1 Mythic Plus dungeon rotation, and there's more cons that I hear than pros. And to be honest, I honestly don't care. I think if Season 4 was of any indication, is that having this type of variety is really nice and feels very fresh. Although it did come in Shadowlands after like a year and a half of the expansion, so...
Except Grimrail Depot, especially with this piece affixes.
Dude, Grimrail Depot is brutal!
Did you guys play this week, Grimrail Depot, by any chance? Don't.
If not, you should. You'll enjoy the rest of your life so much more. Be appreciative and grateful for all the things.
So Grimrail Depot with Sanguine, with what's it called? Storming, and all of those fire mobs that go around. Try to find the spot. Plus, the sleep puddles from the sleep puddles, yeah, and the big. Try to find a fucking place for that as a melee, mind you. Okay, not talking anything. It's a mess. So yeah.
Thanks.
So with
skip.
So with the Season 1 of Dragonflight, we have Ruby Life Pool, Snarkund Offensive, Azure Vault, Algathar's Academy, which we've seen and played with on the beta, and we can talk a little bit about those. And then coming back, we have Halls of Valor, Court of Stars, Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, which I haven't played in like a gazillion years, and Temple of the Jade Serpent, which is always there for time walking, so I don't know. But with these dungeons, in terms of Unholy, what do you guys think? What do you guys think of like the potential? I would say meta. Obviously, it's all speculative right now because on bar us actually testing it, it's who knows what they're gonna do to Mythic Plus affixes, since they usually change them from expansion to expansion. But as what we know so far, what do you guys think about all of this?
I don't know. I'm generally very positive about Unholy's look in Mythic Plus, even if the dungeon isn't like super heavy on target count. Say like the average pull is like 3-4 enemies. Unholy's still got a lot of really good answers to stuff like that. It's got the Death Coil Cleave, you have your Sweeping Claws, you have Bursting Swords still, which is still going to do really good. Like, I think Unholy's got an answer to basically every dungeon, and it does it so well that I can't see I can't see any dungeon where Unholy won't be just really, really good to have in the room. Obviously, the dungeons with bigger packs, heavier pulls, more frequent pulls, Unholy's really, really going to shine there. But even ones where it's not like playing to Unholy strengths, it's still going to be really good.
So, you're saying lots of names of dungeons, and I'm like, I have no idea what these are. So, I really can't say. I feel like Shadowlands Unholy has been lacking utility. Plus, unfortunately, I think that's going to be the case with Dragonflight as well. Like, Unholy is brought to a dungeon because we do a ton of damage. And that's the reason. Not because we can help the group in any other way. I think, as you said, Unholy now has a lot more potential to be good in many different scenarios. And I think like it's going to be overall a good spec because we scale so well. But definitely, like if the tuning isn't there, probably not that much of a reason to bring it DK. But I feel like, Unholy is probably going to go back to being like, oh, this is the best AoE spec in the game. That's the kind of feeling I'm getting. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Positive note all around, man. The spec is great.
Is always good.
Yeah. At the moment, the spec is great, and they're probably not gonna go into too much changes into the actual talents. It's all the tuning game now, which sure it is a bit scary for a lot of the specs on on the beta. There's always the scary part, but just judging by how the talents were made and all of the updates and the changes and pathing and all of that, Unholy as a spec feels great, and I cannot, I cannot be, again, I'm just the brand new noob to the spec, and I've seen it, and I'm so in love with it. This, like, man, what I've been missing out on. Well, probably not too much, because Dragonflight is looking so good. It's like, damn. So I couldn't be more happy, and I'm happy like we're finally be able to talk in like super positive notes about the spec, as opposed to like maybe previous chats and all of that. That being said, boys and gals, I do want to heavily recommend, first of all, Bicepspump's YouTube channel. If you are thinking about trying Unholy DK and want to learn a lot of that in like a more, beginner and also advanced situation, Biceps has you covered over there with his videos. It's the go-to place, man, honestly. And Taez is, I think, one of the most active people like ever on Discord. I've seen, I'm looking at the Acherus Discord, he's there, and you can check out a lot of like really good information and sims and all of that from him. So do check him out. All the links will be in the description. As always, guys, thank you for joining and, having all of your wisdom and experience and information, and why not enthusiasm about Unholy this time around. Thank you for watching or listening, and we'll catch you next time. Next time would be very soon, because it's Frost.
It's probably gonna be Frost DK next podcast, so stay tuned.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
With Shadowlands.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.